The air on the planet Xylos 4 was thick and warm. It carried strange smells, like sweet fruit and wet earth. The sky was a soft purple color, and 2 small suns shone down, making everything feel warm. In a large, grassy clearing, a group of new colonists stood together. They were all different kinds of beings from across the galaxy. Some were tall and thin with gray skin. Others were short and wide with tough-looking hides. Among them were 4 humans. The leader of this group was Instructor Clarn. He was a Xylosian, a very tall being who looked a bit like a praying mantis. His body was covered in a smooth, green shell. His arms and legs were long and ended in sharp points. His head was triangular, with 2 large, dark eyes that did not blink. He looked down at the group, his mandibles clicking softly. "Welcome," his voice buzzed, translated by the small devices everyone wore. "Welcome to your new home. For the next 72 cycles, this will be your world." The colonists listened quietly. The 4 humans stood close to each other. There was Jean, a man with a calm face and watchful eyes. Next to him was Mira, a woman who kept looking at the strange plants around them. Then there was Hannah, who stood strong and solid, her arms crossed. And finally, Sue, a man who shifted his weight from foot to foot, looking nervous. Instructor Clarn continued, "This is a controlled exercise. It is to see if you can live here, to see if you can adapt. You will be taken to different parts of this zone. You will be alone. You must find water, food, and shelter." He took a step forward, his long legs moving silently in the grass. "There is one rule, the most important rule. There are no exceptions." He paused, making sure every person was listening. "No weapons are allowed. No blastes. No plasma blades. No soquestaves. Nothing from the Galactic Weapons Index. This is a test of your mind. It is a test of how you work with nature. It is not a test of fighting. Your survival packs have a simple multi-tool, a water cleaner, and some food bars. That is all you need. Use your knowledge. Do not use force." A few of the other aliens nodded. This made sense to them. Their cultures believed in harmony and following rules. The humans did not nod. They just listened. Their faces were serious. One by one, the colonists were told to enter a small drop pod. The pod would take them to their own starting area. A Xylosian assistant scanned each person and their pod with a glowing blue device. It beeped softly for each person, showing they had only the allowed items. Then it was Jin's turn. He walked to his pod. The assistant moved the scanner over him. A green light. Then the assistant pointed the scanner at Jin's drop pod. A loud, frantic beeping sound filled the clearing. The assistant jumped back. Instructor Clarn's head snapped around. He strode over, his long legs covering the ground quickly. "Human Jean," Clarn buzzed, his voice sharp. "What is the meaning of this? Explain the energy signature. You are trying to bring a forbidden weapon." Jin's face remained calm. "Instructor," he said, his voice even, "I have no weapons. You can look." "Open it," Clarn ordered. Jean pressed a button on the side of the pod. The door slid open with a quiet hiss. Inside, there was no shiny blaster rifle. There was no energy sword. Instead, the pod was filled with what looked like a pile of junk. There were spools of thin, strong wire. There were several metal cans and containers. There were small bags filled with different colored powders. There were pieces of scrap metal in odd shapes. There was a long, coiled rope. There was a rod of a strange gray metal next to a small piece of steel. There were empty bottles and hollow tubes. It was a collection of things that seemed to have no purpose. Clarn stared into the pod. His large, dark eyes took in the strange collection. "What is all this?" he asked, his buzzing voice full of confusion and annoyance. "These are tools, Instructor," Jean said simply. 47 of them. By my count. "Tools," Clarn repeated. He pointed a sharp limb at one of the spools. "What kind of tool is that?" "It is wire," Jean said. "It can be used to tie things together, to build a shelter, to make a snare for food." Clarn pointed at the gray rod. "And that? A fire starter." Jean replied. It makes sparks. For cooking and warmth. Clarn was silent for a moment. He was frustrated. His scanner was going crazy, but none of these things were on the list of forbidden weapons. They were just things. Useless, primitive things. He decided the human was foolish. He was bringing clutter. He would probably be the first to quit the exercise. He would be cold and hungry, surrounded by his useless junk. Very well, Clarn said finally, his voice dripping with disapproval. It is within the rules. But you are making a mistake, human. This planet does not care for your trinkets. It will crush you, and your tools will not save you. Jean just gave a small nod. Understood, Instructor. He closed his pod door. The scanner was waved over it again. It still beeped, but Clarn waved him through. Jean entered the pod and sat down. The door closed, and a moment later, the pod shot up into the purple sky, heading for its drop zone. One by one, the other colonists left. Mira, the plant expert, gave a last look at the strange flowers. Hannah, the engineer, cracked her knuckles. Sue, the tech expert, took a deep, shaky breath. Their pods also launched into the sky, scattering them across the wilderness. Soon, the clearing was empty except for Instructor Clarn and his assistants. He looked up at the sky where the pods had vanished. They are a strange species, one of his assistants said. Clarn clicked his mandibles. They are primitive. They think like cavemen. They grab rocks and sticks. That human, Jean, he is the worst of them. He brings a whole pod of rocks and sticks. He will learn. On Xylos 4, your mind is your only weapon. High above, Jin's pod landed with a soft thud in a different part of the forest. The door opened. The warm, strange air flowed in. Jean stepped out and looked around. He was in a valley near a slow-moving stream. The trees had bright orange leaves. He could hear the calls of unseen animals. He did not look scared. He looked interested. He turned back to his pod and began to carefully take out his 47 tools. He laid them out on a large, flat rock in an orderly way. He knew what each one was for. He picked up the gray rod, the ferrocerium rod, and the piece of steel. He scraped the steel down the rod. A bright, hot spark flew out and landed on a dry leaf. A tiny wisp of smoke curled up. Jean smiled. It was a small, quiet smile. The instructor had said no weapons. Jean had agreed. He did not have any weapons. He had everything else he would possibly need. The lesson was about to begin. Jean stood by his pod and listened. The forest was full of sounds. There were clicks and buzzes and strange bird-like calls. He knew the first thing to do was not to run or panic. The first thing was to think. He needed to find the others. He needed water. He needed shelter before dark. He put his hand into one of his bags. He pulled out a small metal object. It was a whistle, but it was not a normal whistle. It had a small, simple dial on the side. He turned the dial and put it to his lips. He did not blow a loud blast. Instead, he made a soft sound. It was a pattern of notes. It was a very old song from Earth. It was slow and quiet. It would not scare the animals, but a human would know it. He listened. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, from far away to his left, he heard the same tune. The notes were the same. It was an answer. A few minutes later, from another direction, he heard it again. Then a third time. Good. The others had heard him. They were coming. While he waited, he got to work. He took one of his spools of wire. It was very strong but very thin. He walked around the area, looking at the ground. He saw small tracks near the stream. He found a few narrow paths in the undergrowth. Animals used these paths like roads. He cut a long piece of wire and made a loop at one end. He tied the other end to a young, flexible tree. He bent the tree down and set a clever trigger made from 2 sticks. He placed the loop over the animal path. If something small ran through it, the trigger would release, and the tree would snap up, pulling the loop tight. It was a snare. It was not a weapon. It was a way to get food. He heard a rustle in the bushes. He stood up, his hand resting on a heavy metal canister from his pod. But it was Mira. She stepped out of the trees, her eyes bright. She was holding a handful of leaves. "Jean," she said, smiling. "I heard your signal." "Good," Jean said. "See anything useful?" Mira held up the leaves. "This plant is safe. I have seen animals eating it. And these berries are good too. But we need to be careful. Many things here are not safe." She looked at his snare. "That is clever." Soon Hannah arrived. She walked into the clearing with a strong, confident step. She was already carrying a long, straight branch she had found. "Good," she said, seeing Jean and Mira. "We are together. This is better." A few minutes later, Sue appeared. He looked relieved to see them. "The forest is so loud," he said, wiping his brow. "I heard something big moving in the trees." "We will be safe," Jean said calmly. "First, we make a camp. We need a central place. Near water, but not too near." They found a good spot on a small, dry rise not far from the stream. The ground was flat. There were large trees around it for cover. Hannah immediately started looking at the trees and the land. "Good place," she said. "We can build a shelter here. A simple lean-to. It will keep the rain off." She looked at Jin's collection of tools on the rock. "Can I use some of that wire? And do you have anything for cutting?" Jean handed her a spool of wire and a small, saw-toothed blade from his multi-tool. It was not big, but Hannah knew how to use it. She started cutting long, straight poles from a type of tree she said was strong and flexible. Meanwhile, Mira was looking at the water. The stream looked clear, but she was not sure. She took one of the hollow tubes from Jin's supplies. She also took a small bag of white powder from his collection. "This is a coagulant," she said, more to herself than to others. "It makes dirt clump together." She found another plant with big, broad leaves. She cut one with the multi-tool. She made a filter by layering sand, small stones, and crushed up charcoal from last night's fire inside the leaf, using the tube as a funnel. She mixed a tiny bit of the white powder into some water in a bottle, shook it, and poured it through her leaf filter into another bottle. "The purifier in our packs is slow," she explained to Sue, who was watching. "This is faster, and it makes more water at once. We will need a lot of water." Sue nodded. He was not good with plants or building, but he was good with machines and signals. He looked at the strange forest around them. He felt nervous. He wanted to know if something was coming. "Jean," Sue said, "do you have any more wire? And maybe a small power cell? The one from my multi-tool is low, but I can use a little bit." Jean pointed to a different spool of wire, this one made of a different metal. He also handed Sue a small, flat power cell. Sue took them and got to work. He found some dry, hollow seed pods that rattled loudly when he shook them. He tied them together with a piece of wire. He then ran a long wire from the power cell to the cluster of seed pods, connecting it in a clever way. If something broke the wire, or if the circuit was completed by a creature stepping on it, a small charge would run from the power cell and make a little motor vibrate, shaking the noisy seed pods. "It is a simple alarm," Sue said, looking proud. "It will not hurt anything, but it will make a lot of noise if something comes close to the camp." By the time the smaller sun was setting, their camp was taking shape. Hannah had built a strong, slanted shelter using the poles and Jin's wire. She had covered it with large leaves and branches. It looked dry and safe. Mira had a system for making clean water and had identified more safe plants to eat. Sue had set up his alarm system in a wide circle around their camp. And Jin's snare had worked. A small, furry animal about the size of a rabbit was caught by the leg. It was not hurt badly, just held by the wire. Jean carefully took it out of the snare. He used another tool, a very sharp flake of obsidian-like stone he had brought, to quickly and humanely prepare the animal for food. He skewered the meat on a green stick and cooked it over the fire he had made with his sparking rod. The smell of cooking meat filled the camp. It was a good smell, a real smell, not like the nutrient bars. They sat around the fire, eating the cooked meat and some of the berries Mira had found. It was the first real food they had eaten since arriving. It felt good that in the distance, they heard a strange, roaring sound. It was not close, but it was deep and powerful. Sue jumped a little. Hannah looked toward the sound, her face serious. Mira stopped eating to listen. Jean poked the fire with a stick, making the sparks fly up into the darkening purple sky. The instructor said to use our knowledge, Jean said quietly. We are. High above them, in the orbiting monitor station, Instructor Clarn watched the screen. He saw the other alien colonists. One was shivering in a poorly made shelter. Another was trying and failing to start a fire. A third had already eaten all its nutrient bars. Then he switched to the human camp. He saw the well-built shelter, the fire, the water filtration system, the alarm wire. He saw them eating cooked meat and plants. They were not just surviving. They were comfortable. He focused on Jean, sitting by the fire. He looked at the collection of so-called tools laid out neatly nearby. The wire, the cans, the powders. Clarn felt a flicker of something he did not like. It was not anger. It was doubt. The human was not foolish. His tools were not useless. They were the reason the humans were warm, fed, and safe. They had followed the rule of no weapons, but they had brought everything else they needed to win. The rule was the law. But Jean, it seemed, was playing a completely different game. The next day began quietly. The two suns rose, and the forest was calm. The humans continued their work. They were not just waiting to be rescued. They were making their camp better, stronger. They knew the forest was not a friendly place. Hannah worked on the shelter. She used more of Jin's wire and strong vines to make the walls thicker. She wove branches together to make a windbreak. It was not just for comfort now. It was for protection. She looked at the trees around their camp, thinking. Sue checked his alarm system. He walked the whole circle, making sure the wire was tight and the noisemakers were in place. He wished he had more power. He looked at Jin's tools. He saw a small hand crank generator. It was meant for charging small devices. He asked Jean if he could use it. This is good, Sue said, taking the generator. I can make the alarm better. If the wire is cut, it will not just make noise. It can also send a small signal to a light here in the camp. A silent alarm. Jean nodded. Do it. Mira went deeper into the forest, but she never went alone. Jean or Hannah went with her. She was not just looking for food anymore. She was looking for other things. She found a plant with thick, sticky sap. Smelled very bad. She also found a tuber, a thick root, that when she cut it, made her eyes water and her skin itch. She brought these back to camp. She started experimenting. She used one of Jin's metal bowls and mixed the bad-smelling sap with the crushed-up itchy tuber. She added a pinch of a red powder from one of Jin's bags. The mixture bubbled and became a thick, nasty paste. What is that for? Hannah asked, looking at the foul-smelling goo. It is a deterrent, Mira said simply. If an animal smells this, it will not like it. If it gets on their skin, it will irritate them. It will not hurt them. It will just make this place unpleasant. She looked at the sharpened sticks Hannah had made for digging. Can I put some of this paste on those? Hannah handed her a few of the sharpened sticks. They are just digging tools. But if they keep animals away, that is good. Jean was also busy. He and Hannah walked to the edge of their camp, near the animal paths. He looked at the soft ground. We need to make the area around our camp harder to cross, Jean said. We need to slow anything down that comes this way. He did not talk about building weapons. He talked about landscaping, about modifying the terrain. He found a spot where the path was narrow between two trees. He took a long, strong pole and used it to dig a hole. It was not a deep hole, but it was hidden by leaves and branches. This is for waste, Jean said to Hannah. We can put our food scraps in here. It keeps the camp clean. But at the bottom of the hole, he placed one of Hannah's sharpened digging sticks, pointing up. It was not meant to kill a large animal. But if something stepped in it, it would get a very painful surprise. It would not want to take another step. Hannah understood. She helped him dig more of these waste pits in other narrow spots. They were always off the main path, always hidden. A way to manage trash. Then Jean took a long, flexible sapling, a young tree. He bent it all the way down to the ground. He used a clever trigger mechanism made of notched sticks. He connected it to another one of the sharpened sticks, tying it tight with wire. This one was much bigger. He placed it on a game trail, camouflaging it with leaves. This is for larger pests, Jean explained. If a big animal breaks the trigger, the sapling will snap back. It will drive the stick forward with a lot of force. It was a dangerous-looking device, but Jean saw it as a tool for processing wood or for a warning signal. As the day went on, the camp changed. It was still a shelter. It still had a fire and a water filter. But now it was also a place with a silent alarm, with foul-smelling paste smeared on sticks, with hidden pits, and with a large, spring-loaded device on the main trail. They were not waiting for trouble. They were making sure that if trouble came, it would have a very bad time. In the monitor station, Instructor Clarn watched all of this. His confusion grew. The humans were not breaking the rule. They were not making spears or swords. But they were making the land itself fight for them. He saw Jean set the spring-loaded stick trap. The scanner showed it was powerful. Could injure a creature. Clarn almost called it a weapon. But then he watched Jean test it. The stick shot forward and slammed into a dead log, splitting it neatly in two. "See," Jean said to Hannah. "It is a good wood splitter. It saves us energy." Clarn sat back. A wood splitter, a deterrent paste, a waste disposal pit, an alarm system. They had an answer for everything. They were not preparing for a fight. They were just continuing to survive. But their way of surviving was creating a fortress. That evening, the first incident happened. Not at the human camp, but at another one. A Torthan colonist, a being with thick, scaly skin, was trying to sleep in its flimsy shelter. A large, six-legged predator with bladed forelimbs, a razor jaw, came into its camp. The Torthan panicked. It had no weapon. It tried to hit the creature with a rock, but the rock bounced off the creature's hard shell. The razor jaw slashed with its bladed limb, cutting the Torthan's arm. The Torthan screamed and hit the emergency beacon on its pack. A bright red light shot into the sky. A Xylosian recovery team swooped down in a small ship and scared the creature away. They took the injured Torthan back to the orbiter. Clarn watched the medical report. The cut was deep. The Torthan was scared. It wanted to go home. It had failed the test. He switched the screen back to the human camp. They had heard the scream and seen the red beacon. They were not panicking. They were looking at each other. Then, they got up and started checking their tools. Hannah made sure the shelter walls were tight. Sue checked his alarm wire for the 10th time. Mira put more of her nasty paste on more of the sharpened sticks. Jean walked to the spring-loaded wood splitter and made sure the trigger was sensitive. They were not scared. They were ready. Clarn realized the truth. The human camp was the most dangerous place on this part of the planet. Not because of the humans, but because of their ideas. They had turned a survival exercise into an engineering project. And they were very, very good engineers. The razor jaws had no idea what they would be walking into. The storm came fast. The sky, which was usually a soft purple, turned a dark, angry gray. The wind began to howl through the trees, making the orange leaves fly through the air like little fires. Then the rain started. It was not a gentle rain. It was a heavy, pounding downpour that soaked everything in seconds. Inside their shelter, the humans were mostly dry. The roof Hannah had built was strong. The water ran off the leaves and branches. But the storm was a problem. The rain and wind would hide sounds. It would hide smells. It was the perfect time for a hunter to attack. Sue looked at his alarm box. The little light was dark. "The rain might break the wire," he said, his voice nervous. "Or the sound might stop working." Jean looked out at the sheets of rain. "Then we listen with our own ears. We watch with our own eyes." They took turns standing by the shelter entrance, looking into the stormy darkness. The fire was low, just a few glowing coals protected by a rock. They did not want a big light that would attract attention. Then, they heard it. A low growl different from the wind. It was a rough, grinding sound. Then another. And another. There was more than one creature out there. Sue's alarm suddenly worked. The cluster of seed pods near the western path started rattling loudly, a frantic sound against the drumming rain. Something was there. Hannah grabbed one of the long, sharpened digging sticks. It was coated with Myra's foul paste. "They are testing the edges," she said. Jean nodded. He picked up his sling, a simple Y-shaped piece of wood with a leather pouch and a few of his clay projectiles. "Remember," he said, his voice calm, "we are not hunting. We are discouraging." The first razor jaw came out of the trees. It was a terrifying sight in the flashes of lightning. It was low to the ground with 6 powerful legs. Its skin was a dark, mottled green that shone wet in the rain. Its head was mostly mouth, filled with rows of sharp teeth. But its most dangerous parts were its front limbs. They were not legs. They were long, bladed arms that it held up, ready to slash. It moved toward the shelter, its eyes glowing a pale yellow that it did not see the first waste pit. His front leg stepped right through the leaves and into the hole. There was a sharp cry of pain as the hidden, pointed stick jabbed deep into its foot. The creature jumped back, limping and snarling. It was not a deadly wound, but it was a shock. This place was not like the other camps. The razor jaw was angry now, charged forward, ignoring the pain. It headed straight for the shelter where the humans were. Passed between 2 trees. Its body hit the thin, almost invisible tripwire for Jin's wood splitter. There was a loud thwip sound and a snap. The bent sapling whipped forward with incredible force. The large, sharpened stick tied to it shot out like a bolt. It was not aimed to kill. It was aimed low. The stick slammed into the creature's shoulder joint, right where the leg met the body. The razor jaw screamed. It was a horrible, high-pitched sound. The stick was stuck in its flesh. The force of the impact had broken the joint. The creature stumbled and fell, thrashing on the ground, unable to get up. It was not dead, but it was out of the fight. It was in too much pain to move. The other razor jaws, 2 more of them, saw this. They smelled the blood and heard the screams of their packmate. They became more cautious. They circled around to the other side of the camp point. One of them stepped on a different digging stick that was lying on the ground, point up. The stick, coated with Myra's paste, poked into the soft pad of its foot. First, it was just a prick, but then the paste started to work. A burning, itching sensation spread through its foot. The creature shook its leg, trying to get rid of the terrible feeling. It started biting at its own foot, confused and in pain. The third razor jaw was the biggest. It was the pack leader. It saw the humans in the shelter. It saw its pack falling to these strange, hidden pains. It decided to charge. It was fast, ignoring the paths, crashing through the undergrowth straight for them. Sue saw it coming. He had one last tool. He had taken a small power cell and 2 pieces of wire. He had placed the wires in a puddle of water right in the creature's path. As the razor jaw ran through the puddle, its wet body completing a circuit, Sue connected the wires to the power cell. There was a sharp crack and a bright blue flash. The electricity was not strong enough to kill, but it was a massive, painful shock. The razor jaw convulsed, its muscles locking up for a second. It fell onto its side in the mud, stunned and twitching. It got up slowly. His body was smoking slightly. It looked at the humans. It looked at the one with the broken shoulder, screaming. It looked at the other one, still biting its own itchy foot. The leader made a decision. It let out a low, frustrated growl. Then it turned and limped away into the rain. The other injured creature followed it, leaving their packmate behind. The fight was over. It had lasted less than 2 minutes. The humans stood in the shelter, breathing heavily. The rain continued to fall. The injured razor jaw on the ground was still crying in pain. Hannah looked at the stick in her hand. She had not even used it. Sue looked at his little power cell. Mira looked at her bowl of paste. Jean looked at his simple sling. They had not fired a laser. They had not swung a blade. They had not thrown a single punch. They had used a hidden hole, a spring-loaded stick, some itchy plants, and an electric puddle that in the orbiting station. Instructor Clarn was on his feet. He had watched the entire attack on the monitor. His screen showed the heat signatures of the creatures, their frantic movements. He saw the first one fall to the pit. He saw the second one get hit by the spring-loaded device. He saw the third get shocked. He saw the humans win without a single weapon. He was furious. This was not the point of the exercise. This was combat. He turned to his assistant. Prepare a shuttle. We are going down there now. The storm was still raging when Clarn's shuttle landed near the human camp. He stepped out, a tall, angry figure in the rain. His security team followed him, their own weapons ready. He marched into the camp. He saw the razor jaw with the stick in its shoulder, still whimpering. He saw the other tools everywhere. The foul smell of Myra's paste filled the air. He pointed a sharp limb at Jean, who was standing calmly by the shelter. Human Jean. Clarn's voice buzzed with rage. You have violated the spirit of this exercise. This is not survival. This is a war zone. You have used these things as weapons. Jean looked at the injured creature. He looked at the angry instructor. His face was peaceful. Instructor, Jean said, his voice clear over the rain. You said no weapons. We have no weapons. These are survival tools. The pit was for waste disposal. The spring device was for splitting wood. The paste was for preserving animal hides. The electric current was for agitating water to attract fish. We were just doing our chores. He gestured to the wounded razor jaw. Their arrival was an interruption. Our tools performed their functions. Unfortunately, the functions were performed on the predators. It was an unfortunate necessity. We used our knowledge to survive, exactly as you instructed. Clarn was speechless. He looked at the waste pit with the sharp stick. He looked at the wood splitter that had speared a creature. He looked at the hide-preserving paste that made an animal bite itself. He looked at the fish attractor that had shocked a razor jaw. The human was right. By the strict letter of the law, he was right. There was not a single classified weapon here. There was only a terrifyingly creative use of simple tools. Clarn stood in the pouring rain, defeated not by force, but by a definition. The rain slowed to a drizzle. The only sounds were the dripping of water from the leaves and the low, pained whimpers of the injured razor jaw. Instructor Clarn stood frozen, his shiny carapace wet and glistening. He looked from Jin's calm face to the scene of quiet victory around him. The security team lowered their weapons, unsure what to do. Finally, Clarn let out a long, slow breath that sounded like steam escaping. Your explanation is noted, he buzzed, the anger gone from his voice, replaced by a tired confusion. He pointed at the hurt creature. We must tend to that. The Xylosian security team moved forward carefully. One of them carried a medical kit. They sedated the razor jaw and carefully removed the sharpened stick from its shoulder. They cleaned and bandaged the wound. Then they lifted the sleeping creature onto a stretcher to take it away for proper healing. Clarn watched them work. He then looked at the human camp again. The strong shelter, the water filter, the clever alarm system. It was the most advanced base on the whole planet, built from what he had called junk. The exercise is over for you four, Clarn announced, his voice flat. You will return to the orbiter for debriefing. The humans gathered their few personal things. They did not need to pack much. They left the shelter standing. They left the tools on the rock. They followed Clarn into the shuttle and sat down quietly. The ride up to the station was silent. Back in the clean, bright meeting room of the orbiter, the other colonists were waiting. The Torthan who had been injured was there, its arm in a sling. It looked at the humans with wide eyes. The others whispered among themselves. They had heard stories. They had seen the human camp on the monitors. Instructor Clarn stood at the front of the room. He was supposed to give a speech about the lessons learned. He was supposed to talk about harmony and using your mind. The words felt empty now. He looked at the humans. The human team passed the survival exercise. He said the words, but they did not sound right. They demonstrated exceptional resourcefulness and adaptation. He dismissed the group. The other aliens left, casting long, curious looks at Jean, Mira, Hannah, and Sue. The humans were about to leave too when Clarn spoke again. Jean. A moment. The others left. Jean stayed, standing alone in the large room. Clarn walked over to him. The tall Xylosian looked less like a powerful instructor now and more like a puzzled student. "I do not understand," Clarn said, his buzzing voice quiet. "My people have rules. We have categories. A thing is a tool or it is a weapon. It is one or the other. Your people, you do not see this difference. A rock is a hammer. It is a weight. It is a throwing object. It is everything and nothing. It is chaos." Gene thought for a moment. He looked out the large window at the planet below, a beautiful ball of green and blue and purple. "Instructor," Gene said softly, "on Earth, our oldest ancestors were not the biggest or the strongest. They were smart. They looked at a sharp piece of stone. They did not just see a rock. They saw a way to cut meat, to shape wood, to defend their family. They did not invent the first weapon. They invented the first tool. And every tool has many, many uses." He turned to look at Clarn. "The universe is not a list of categories. It is a collection of possibilities. You told us to use our knowledge. Our knowledge is that anything can be a tool if you understand it. It is not about making weapons. It is about refusing to see anything as useless." Clarn was silent for a long time. He looked at the human. He was so small and soft, but his mind was like a fortress. He had not broken a single rule. He had simply shown that the rules were too small to contain human thought. "I see," Clarn finally said. It was all he could say. The humans were given their own room on the station. They ate real food from the galley and slept in soft beds. It was comfortable, but it felt strange after the forest. A few days later, they were preparing to leave. A new group of colonists was arriving for their own survival test. As Gene walked through the hallway to the departure bay, he passed the main training room. He stopped. Inside, he saw Instructor Clarn. He was standing before the new, nervous-looking colonists. There were humans in this new group too. Clarn began his speech. "Welcome. The first rule is this. No manufactured weapons are allowed." It was the same as before, but then he paused. He looked directly at the new human colonists. "However," Clarn continued, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully, "you must understand a concept. It is called improvisation. It is a human word. It means to make do with what you have, to see the potential in everything." He picked up a simple rock from a display table. "Is this a weapon?" he asked. "Or is it a tool?" The answer is, it is what you need it to be. Your greatest tool is not in your pack. It is here. He tapped the side of his head. Your mind. Use it. Gene smiled. He did not go in. He simply turned and walked to his ship. Weeks later, on Earth, the story was told. But the bigger change happened in the Galactic Colonization Authority. A new document was published. It was a very long, very complicated addendum to the survival exercise rules. It was called Clarification on Multipurpose Tool Utilization, Terran Standard. It had hundreds of pages trying to define what a tool was and what it was not. It tried to list all the possible uses for wire, for sticks, for rocks. It was a mess. Everyone hated it. The lawyers could not understand it. The instructors found it useless. Meanwhile, Instructor Clarn started his lessons differently for every new group. He no longer started with the rule. He started by holding up a simple, ordinary rock. He would say, "Tell me, what is this?" And he would always wait to hear what the humans had to say.